It is Monday, May 7th, 5 p.m. in Washington, D.C. My name is Christine Frizzau, and you're watching RT. Let's begin with this hour with a look at some of the changes in terms of delegate count for the two Republican candidates left in the race. Now, the numbers are a little fluid, and we won't have an exact count really until the Republican convention in August. But over the weekend, these were a few of the headlines that we saw. How Ron Paul could mess with Romney at the GOP convention. Ron Paul power play at Maine GOP convention. Ron Paul wins the majority of delegates from Maine GOP, and Ron Paul nabs Nevada delegates from Romney. Now, for many in the mainstream media, Ron Paul continues to be ignored. But more and more respected publications are catching on, saying at the very least, Ron Paul is a force to be reckoned with. So let's talk about this. I've got Austin Peterson, Director of Interactive Media of Freedom Works here. Austin, talk about this. I mean, on one hand, Ron Paul has said this is his strategy from day one. Keep it grassroots, take advantage of some of these, arcane delegate selection rules, and make this work for him. What's going on here?
Well, we started this campaign for liberty back in 2008, really, and we understand that the democratic process works in a very complex manner. These rules are very arcane. So we were very inexperienced in 2008 with the takeover of the GOP, so we were unsuccessful. But at the time, we were able to take over some leadership positions in the GOP at the time, which has given us power in this election. Because the thing that only matters is the selection of delegates. Much of the straw polls that you saw, which gave Santorum or Romney a victory, really didn't mean anything, because what mattered was that you stayed to become an elector. The Electoral College is the system that the Founding Fathers gave the Americans, and once we started to master the Electoral College process, the Ron Paul delegates have been able to successfully start to take over these parties because they put themselves in leadership roles.
We saw Maine and Nevada over the weekend. Also Iowa. So interesting, Iowa, because first Romney won Iowa, then Santorum won, and now we're seeing that Ron Paul, in fact, has the most delegates from that state.
Right. Well, they say Mitt Romney won or Rick Santorum won, but what did they win? They won a straw poll. When the straw poll is over at night, they say, okay, everybody can go home. But what happens after that is that they say, okay, now we're going to just elect some delegates. And if you don't know the rules, then you might just go home. So what happened was Romney supporters went home. Santorum supporters went home. Ron Paul supporters stayed, and that's how they took the delegates.
And we're not sitting here, at least I'm not sitting here, and trying to make the case that Mitt Romney probably won't become the Republican nominee. But I do want to put up a map just to take a look at what it's looking like so far. These are the states that Ron Paul has won, the ones in red that you see there. It looks like about 11 of them. And in some ways, this doesn't look like an election that's all over. This strategy, again, this is not a secret that Ron Paul's people have been using, focusing on the delegate tally. Do you think some people are surprised when they look at this map?
They're surprised, but if they're watching television, they can't be surprised because the mainstream media is mostly not reporting on what's happening in this. It's also very complex. It's difficult to understand. Ron Paul supporters want a win. We're pushing for #1. We want to take the presidency. We want to take the White House. We want to restore the republic. That's the big goal. But there are all sorts of little victories that can be won along the way. We have to keep pushing in a stair-stepping manner. There are things that we can do, like we can affect the platform, which would essentially give us more power to change the dynamic of the country, change the conversation towards the issues that we really want, like auditing of the Fed or things like abolishing the TSA or abolishing the IRS and things like that. So we can affect the dialogue by pushing for the #1 victory, trying to win the presidency. But even if we didn't, even if we lost, there would be all sorts of little battles that we could win along the way and come back in 2016 if we need to.
And I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that the conversation has not already changed. When you talk about the things that you mentioned, things like the Fed, in some cases the gold standard, the TSA, there are many sort of mainstream or more mainstream conservatives getting on board, starting to adopt these arguments. However, there are other things that Ron Paul has come to represent. An end to the wars, a position that is not overly loving to Israel. These are things that I think a lot of conservatives just can't get on board with. You say the #1 mission is to get him elected. Would you say that those are your biggest barriers?
Perhaps. I mean, some conservatives would disagree with us on things like ending the wars. Some of them would tend to be more overtly pro-Israel. But, Ron Paul does argue that his position is more pro-Israel in the sense that if we had a position of neutrality in foreign affairs, we wouldn't be telling telling Israel what to do when it comes to their border skirmishes. They might have a little bit more national sovereignty, such as the United States, to decide what they want to do. So when you talk about things like that, some people can say that maybe his position is a little bit more pro-Israel rather than sort of anti-Israel. But things like ending the wars, which wars? There's so many wars going on. Not all conservatives support all the wars. Some wars are Democrat wars. The war in Libya, for example, that was Obama who started the NATO bombing with France and Britain to unseat Gaddafi. That was a
However,
Democrat
you
war.
had some of the most well-known hardcore Republicans, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, saying Libya should have lasted longer and been more hardcore.
Oh, sure, absolutely. But you also had some hardcore Tea Party Republicans like Michelle Bachmann come out, who you would say might be pro-war in certain cases, come out against the Obama administration for this because they did not seek authorization of Congress, and it was totally unconstitutional.
Very true. I want to get your reaction, Austin, to the people who say that the only reason that Ron Paul is doing this is A, staying in the race, B, continuing to campaign, is for his son, that he wants to get his son, now Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul, eventually in a spot where he might run for president in 4 years or 8 years. What's your reaction to this?
I mean, it might be, but that just doesn't sound like Ron Paul to be so singularly focused on something like that. I think Ron Paul is more the type of person who wants to carry the torch. He wants to light up the minds of young people, light the brush fires of liberty. I think the Rand Paul issue is something that is significant. I think that if we were to lose this election and Rand Paul came back in 2016 running for president, he would have the machinery of the Ron Paul campaign to be able to do it with. I think that would be really exciting and interesting, and probably Ron thinks about that too, but he's not the type of person to really predict the future. He's really a very pragmatic person. As much as they say he's, this ideologue who, lives in this fantasy world, he really does make very practical steps to advance his cause. And so if he was thinking about something like advancing the cause of Senator Rand Paul or something like that, then it's probably more on the side issues of his mind, something that he would hope for, but not necessarily know that it's going to happen.
Let's look ahead to the Republican National Convention. Again, Ron Paul, the only other person still in this race. And a lot of people are asking, first of all, we haven't seen, in the same ways that we saw Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum really come down hard on Mitt Romney, we haven't seen Ron Paul do that. There's a lot of talk in some of the inner circles that, these guys are buddies. They get along. A lot of people are wondering, what is it that Ron Paul wants from Romney in exchange for either his delegates or his endorsement? Is there going to be some sort of exchange that we see happen in August? That's
really the exciting little story that's going on behind the scenes. That's a really good question. I talk to libertarians all the time about this, the secret Romney-Paul alliance, and I like to ask them, I say, as a Ron Paul supporter, what could get you to vote for Mitt Romney? And I actually have found that a lot of libertarians have said to me that the only way that they could vote for Mitt Romney is if they do a deal with Ron Paul where it's something like he's the VP or Senator Rand Paul is the VP. We have like a Judge Andrew Napolitano as an Attorney General, and we have an audit of the Fed and a firing and public shaming of Ben Bernanke. Now that would be the kind of thing that a libertarian could get behind and say, well, if Mitt Romney has changed so much, then he's flip-flopped over to be a libertarian, then a libertarian might be able to pull the lever for him. Now that's a really small chance, of course, but it's the kind of thing that gives libertarians hope and keeps us working forward.
And I think it's an important thing to look at too, because right now, I mean, it is only May, but you're looking at these polls and you're seeing Romney, Obama in a dead heat. If Romney loses the Ron Paul supporters, if they just don't vote for anyone after all, I think you're going to see a different race and some different numbers. Appreciate you having you on the show, Austin Peterson, Director of Interactive Media, FreedomWorks. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, still ahead here on RT, the TSA's frisky fingers apparently rubbed one GOP lawmaker the wrong way. He's now calling for an end to the entire system. So, could there be a strip down of TSA's sketchy practice? We'll be back in a moment.